Mrs. Lafont,
and Mrs. Reese. Today, we will be going over all different differentiations for students that come from newly arrived, not proficient in English. 8 who are under grade level. 9 come from rote learning. And 1 significantly above grade level.
we will be going through the integers and representation of whole numbers in the number strand, which is the general learning outcome of demonstrating number sense. Next, the specific learning outcome for our students is that they're going to demonstrate an understanding of integers concretely, pictorially, and symbolically. And we're using the mathematical processes of C, Cn, R, and V.
Hello and welcome back to Integers 101
with Mrs. Lafont
and Mrs. Reese. We're going to be talking about in this segment positive or negative numbers. I know lots of you think this is a hashtag, but it actually means a number or a pound symbol on your telephone.
Hashtag math is cool.
Ding, 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 ding.
Okay, so the first thing that we worked through for our differentiation in helping newly arrived students who are not proficient in English is that as teachers we decided that physical movement and physical involvement within the mathematical concept is really helpful. So for example, actually creating a physical student number line, having the students line up one by one.
This is 0.
This is positive 1. Clinton.
He's
This is positive 2.
Negative 1.
Negative 1.
Negative 1. So we would explain this to the students so that they're actually physically moving.
Another thing you can do with students is make sure that you're relating it to real world content. If these students aren't coming from Canada or around in different parts of the world, they are going to connect to what you're teaching when it's already foreign to them if you're bringing something in that maybe they can understand a little bit more. Taking things that are around them in day-to-day life that they can connect to. When they're taking a banana off of the stem, there was 3, now there's 2. So what is that doing? It's going -1. Things like that.
Next, we would provide our students who are not proficient in English a sheet with vocabulary on it. Students who are just arriving in Canada may not necessarily understand the complete mathematical context and the mathematical vocabulary, so having a guiding sheet with the vocabulary on it may help.
Next thing, which hopefully we say as many students do not get this support, is just having an EA in a room that may know that student might need a little bit more help just for vocabulary, thinking about things that may not be as logical for them at the moment just because of our language.
And it may also help alleviate the teacher themselves as well, so that they know they have an extra adult in the classroom, so the teacher can go and work one-on-one with our 4 students who are not proficient in English.
So next one is we had 8 students who are under grade level. Oh, just kidding.
We skipped one. So also for the students who may not necessarily be proficient in English, they can verbally express themselves as well, because oftentimes if they're not 100% comfortable speaking English or unsure of the language, writing may become very difficult for them. So if they can spend one-on-one time with either the EA or the teacher, that would be a really good differentiation opportunity for the students who aren't 100% with English.
Back to what I was saying. The next one we're speaking about is 8 students under grade level. So one of the first things we said is just simpler numbers. You don't need to give these students numbers that are 36 and 52 and 105. Stick with what they know. A small demonstration like this is still going to be difficult for some of the students. There's no issue with starting with smaller numbers because the facts and what they need to know are still going to be with it.
Yeah. To further that, we strongly believe that diagrams play a huge role in helping students and a form of differentiation, because for example, if we have the number 4, we can all see that it's the number 4 there. But if you don't have a number sense of what 4 actually may look like, having a diagram beside the actual number might help the student, especially when you are looking at positive and negative numbers.
The next thing you can do is always use, this is a big word for Mrs. Reese, manipulatives. Something like bingo chips. A professor we know, Neil, he loves using these, and it's great for us.
The foam kind.
The foam kind, yes. So using those for the students actually be able to touch and feel and see that they're physically taking things away or physically adding things is going to help them visually understand a little bit better of what they're doing, instead of just looking, in this sense, at a number chart that are just a bunch of numbers that they may not actually know what those numbers stand for.
Next, we both strongly agree that games and activities are huge and really important, and not just for students who are under grade level, but for all students across the board, right? If you have students playing games or participating in activities, it's a really great way that you can involve the students within the mathematical context without them actually knowing that they're learning something new throughout that game. So it's another form of manipulative, but through a game where you're actually meeting certain outcomes.
We also talked about drawing, which is kind of about the diagrams as well. We're giving them the diagram in this sense, but they could also be drawing what they're seeing, what they think the numbers are, just to help them out that way, just almost another sense of manipulatives.
And again, of course, verbal expression. We believe that it would really help a student who maybe is already struggling and below grade level. Why exactly are they below grade level? Is it because they maybe have difficulties writing? They can verbally express it. Their attention span's not as well. They don't work well in a large amount of people in the classroom. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can reach out to every student and have them express their knowledge, right? Just if they're not able to write it down, but they can verbally express it in a much better way, that still counts as the knowledge they know.
Then for our third one that we're going to go over, we are talking about the 9 students that come from rote learning. So those students, they know formulas, they're really good at memorization, but we need to get them away from that and understand number sense a little bit better. So again, something that we've kind of repeated in the last couple is, using my favorite word, manipulatives. That's going to let them actually see. Asking them to show what they did is going to be a lot harder for them than to just produce the answer.
Again, for our rote learners, illustrations of their understanding is this guy. Illustrations of understanding is super important because it doesn't allow them to only strictly focus on their memorized formula. So if they're actually having to draw their understanding, it's using a different part of their brain, and it's not just pulling out the memorization. They're actually having to physically use their process of the mathematical process and explain in detail how they solve that specific question. Drawing's also really fun. That's a way you can integrate math into art as well. So that's another differentiation that you can do and cross-curricular outcomes.
And then one that they seem to like the most is less repetition, no mad minutes, always changing numbers, always changing just what you're doing with them for them to really gain a better understanding of what you're really learning so that they don't forget it as soon as they walk out the door.
Also, just to add on that mental math, like mad minutes, speed tests or anything like that really doesn't help any student. We actually read an article about math anxiety, and it's super important to try and avoid that so that you can really promote the best learning opportunity for students.
And then the last one is significantly above. We had one student who's significantly above grade level, Clinton. So something we talked about is that letting that student be the teacher, just so that they can show you and verbalize what they're seeing, which is also going to let you as a student understand what the student's actually thinking and where they're getting this information from. But it also makes them think a little bit harder than just producing the answer.
Second, it kind of ties into you be the teacher, but that student specifically being the group leader, then there's more being put on them so that they can actually help the others teach the lesson, because sometimes students learn a little bit better from other teachers explaining the specific content to them. Next, of course, visuals is huge. If students can use visuals to help the other students understand, that would be beneficial. Also, not necessarily providing extra work, but giving them problem-solving questions that are a little more complex so that they can use their knowledge and their above knowledge to further their understanding. That's all for now until we get to our next learning outcome. Get it.
I wish we didn't press record.
Hi, and welcome back to Integers 101 with Mrs. Lafont and
Mrs. Reese!
Okay, so for this section, we were talking about students
Understanding where numbers go on the number line, both vertically and horizontally. As well, we're going to connect, you have to have a blooper at one point.
Good, we're keeping it.
We're also connecting where you visually see integers in day-to-day life. For examples, a thermometer.
Or bill statements, bank statements,
Loans.
Mrs. Reese also wrote down loans. We realized that grade 6 students probably don't have loans, but you can still expose them to these sorts of things and relate it to their own personal little loan from maybe their parents if they're really saving up for a bike and they took specific money out. Anyways, okay, so we're gonna start with our number 1 group. So that's for newly arrived students who are not proficient in English. So for example, simple little activities like connecting the dots based on an activity sheet is super crucial for students because they're actually able to use.
Blooper number 2.
They understand where the numbers go based on the sheet. So if they had this whole sheet, having them work around the numbers is getting them exposed and getting their feet wet a little bit with where numbers should go based on a grid.
And then these pictures will also, while they're connecting the dots, are going to probably draw a really nice picture for them to see. So it's also something entertaining for them to do. It's not just all of a sudden it's a square. There's going to be some sort of picture which keeps them a little bit more invested in it. The next thing that we can do is breaking and chunking info down. So this is a pretty big thing, and I think that if a student came here who, if we stood in front of them and just explained in English how these things are to work, they're going to have a really difficult time understanding what, even if we're saying about horizontally or vertically, we can't just assume that these students know what we're talking about. We need to make sure that everything we're saying is constantly being introduced to them in a specific way, making sure that they understand. Horizontal, we can talk about the horizon and how the sun comes up on the horizon. Or vertical, which could be represented by
how high someone can jump to get the basketball in the net.
Vertical. So just breaking down everything we think is really crucial for these students just so that they're not overwhelmed, because if this is put in front of them with a bunch of negatives, even a negative number, they might not understand it. One thing we had spoke about is if they're new to Canada, most often they might probably be coming from somewhere that is a little bit warmer, so they might not understand things like snow. So thinking about it, saying when it's 0 degrees, the snow is beginning to melt. When it's past 0 degrees, that's when the ice is frozen. So thinking about those negatives and those positives in a direction that way works as well.
Another thing that we find super important for differentiation strategies for newcomer students are having flexible learning groups. This can also work with students who are under grade level as well. And what we mean by flexible learning groups is either being flexible with if the student wants to work individually, which can also tie into our students who's above grade level, or working with pairs, maybe having someone who understands the content and someone who's a little bit wishy-washy with the content paired together, or vice versa, two students who don't understand and working individually with the teacher. Next, also having small groups based on their abilities so that they can move forward in groups, or a mixture of all together so other students can support their learning, and that those specific students can also share their wealth of knowledge to that student and explain the way they understand the mathematical concept.
I kind of touched base on this already with assessment adaptation, so just less questions, explanations, using different vocabulary. Just the way that you're really assessing them needs to be different because the students haven't came through school at the same level and in the same classes as usually most of the other students that are in the class.
Another thing, just to add on to the assessment adaptation, is a really good strategy for, even if it's just simply reading something mathematical, having a folder and cut it in half and having a specific paper assignment behind that folder so that you can flip it over top or underneath, and the student can follow along with the paper as they pull it down so that they don't get overwhelmed by the vast amount of information provided to them right away, so they're actually able to follow step by step.
There's a couple things that from the last lesson that we just talked about that of course would still connect with this. One, especially for both, especially for a situation like this, we talked about those vocabulary sheets that we talked about handing out. For the second one that we're going to speak about is the 8 undergrade level students.
So something important is potentially having tiered assignments, and this can be for all students, but this would really help students who maybe are under grade level, because by having tiered assignments, it's not becoming overwhelming all at once because the assignment's broken down into chunks, right? So just like our breaking down and chunking information, having tiered assignments is a great tool and stepping stone for the students to succeed as well. So if they're understanding step 1, awesome, they've mastered it, perfect, let's move on to tier number 2 and apply our tier 1 knowledge to tier 2, and having a base off of that, it will also give students a little bit of confidence as well to be able to move forward and see their progression.
And Mrs. LaFawn also drew this really great traffic light, which kind of has to do with that too. They might not want to tell you where they're at in their learning. They might just say that they are ready. So having a little bit more fun, doing hand signals, traffic light, that's just going to let you understand a little bit better at where they are at their learning.
And if they don't necessarily feel comfortable specifically saying in front of the class where they're at with their learning, what the teacher can do to differentiate that as well is on the back of their paper that they worked on, or some sort of activity, or exit slip, whatever way you're going to assess after, you could have the students always have a red, yellow, or green marker in their desk, and at the back of the paper they draw a circle of the color of where they're feeling comfortable at, with maybe a question or something that they want help with, and the teacher can go and revisit that specific student.
And I think for both of these, and like I said earlier, we've talked about it in the last lesson we gave, so we don't want to continually repeat things, but using my favorite word, manipulatives, will always help with this as well. Just looking at taking things away and adding things, visual is going to be important all around for both of these.
Using everyday language is super important for newcomers and students who are above grade level. This also can tie into the other individual students as well, because if you are using everyday context, you're setting up the students for success. If you're just standing up at the front as the teacher and trying to use large mathematical terms just to confuse the child, that's not going to help them succeed or become much better at the math concept, right? Their number sense is going to get a little more mixed up because they're trying to wrap their heads around those specific terms. So by using everyday language instead of complex terms, I do find that that's beneficial for all students across the board, but significantly with under grade level or newcomers.
The next one we're going to speak about is the 9 students coming from a rote learning. Again, some of this is a little bit repetitive from last year, but there's but there's always new stuff that we can add. So one of them, visual student number line. So having the students really see this would be what we had kind of explained prior. If I'm 0, this is 1. I don't know if you can see Julian, he might be 2. Clinton is -1. Megan might be -2. Just having them really have to explain their thought process, because again, it's really easy for them to just spit the answer out and make you happy, but what's going to make you really happy is when they know about number sense.
And just to add on that too is when you're using your hands with specific content, when you're learning it, it helps you remember it a lot better as if you were actually in in movement with it. So for example, if you were to take out a giant, we'll say life-size coordinate on your classroom floor and have students place themselves accordingly to the coordinate that you call out, this would be a good way to understand if students have a good number sense and conceptual understanding of where numbers are to be placed.
Speaking with that, we kind of added two things, whether we're doing real life problems or just giving the students different questions. We want to make sure that with them, that maybe we're doing a little bit more word-based problems because it makes them think, that makes them have to think a lot more on what they're doing. Whether instead of putting numbers, because they know the numbers, they've memorized those numbers, they know exactly what to do, they see a 3, they see a 2, they see a negative subtraction sign, they know that it's going to be 1. But when they're actually reading the things and maybe your Word documents or your assignments are going to be a couple sentences, they're not going to be one sentence, it might be a small paragraph that they really have to pick out the details, that's going to make them have to really think about it more and use ducks, use elephants, use countries, just use things that are not really usually known in the math world.
And you can also use their choice as well, which is super important, or their interests, for example. Which, speaking of interest, this also ties into number 4 here, and that's having a student who is above grade level. So they are considered talented or gifted, right? So they're above and they understand their Sorry, I'm gonna move.
Oh no, you can.
Oh, you can? Okay, so they really understand the math and they're above. So for example, making sure that the students can mathematically reason is super important. If that student's actually able to reason their understanding even though they're above grade level, having something like problem solving and reasoning that problem is important. Also, one thing, when I had tied it into interest centers, I had found this idea online. And interest centers are basically having, it's almost like a club that you can kind of direct the student to facilitate, and based on their interests, they can have some sort of math club going on at the school, which of course you would be supervising, but allow the students to follow their interests and really strive for those types of things.
Again, speaking with the one significant student in the class that has significantly above grade level learning, provide problems that do not have clear solutions. So that can either do two things. You can help with that, but it also allows him to this individual, not him, he or she, just have a larger understanding of mentorship if they do get through the problem, but it also makes them have to think a little bit more. You need to be able to, the answer shouldn't just pop out at them. At a grade 6 level, that might be a little bit more simpler. If you have a grade 9 level, though, that's going to be a little bit more difficult.
And on top of the mentorship as well, actually having the student potentially mentor other students in the classroom, just so that the classroom environment itself remains a safe and inclusive environment for students that everyone wants to learn in. Not just always having that one student who, he or she or they is considered the super smart student, so they also don't walk around with a chip on their shoulder thinking that they know everything. So just providing mentorship between all grade levels of students as well is super important.
We love Clinton.
Yeah. This further ties into involving students in creating assignments, not only for students who are above grade level, but it's important to involve our rote learners or our newcomers or our students of under grade level. Because once you involve the students within the creation of a specific assignment or examples, their interest typically spikes, right?
They'll be more invested in it.
Yeah.
They'll just want to actually learn, because oftentimes this student or whoever this person is, or one or two of them, are bored in class because they're just not getting enough challenge. So if you're giving them something to do, they're going to take pride in it for the most of the time, and that's going to give them more of a push to actually do these things and work a little bit harder, and maybe go beyond levels that you didn't even know that they could go, because they want to see how far they can go, because you're giving them responsibility, and most of the time they really enjoy that.
Yeah, exactly, and it just ties in with choice, right? Choice is super important, and I believe that's education's really turning towards choice.
I came on the wrong side. Oh, that's so funny.
Blooper 101, Mrs. Reese on her cell phone.
Bad. Looking for a house. I'm looking for a house.
I was gonna say bad teaching instruction here.
Am I on video?
Yeah. Oh. Okay, so last topic. Greater than, less than, equal to. So comparing integers.
We found that this one is quite standard, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to say easy, but it's quite standard for most people to know. 3 and 4 are going to have a decent time doing this. That's the rote learning.
We're also brain dead.
And the significantly above grade level. However, for these students above, newly arrived, and under grade level, something that we just think that we can do very easily with them is what Mrs. LaFawn did, where you were just drawing a diagram so that they understand. You want to eat, do you want to eat the little tiny cheeseburger over here, pretend this isn't here, or do you want to eat the huge cheeseburger that is here? The huge cheeseburger because you're really hungry, meaning you're going to eat it.
A differentiation method that we could do is something that I've previously used in my classroom experience is through games. Again, I love games, but specifically popcorn math. Now, the way you can differentiate based on just that game is by having a popcorn bag, you have a bunch of specific numbers in the bag already. Those pieces of paper are all cut up into specific slits with numbers pre-written, or you can have the students write them as well to get them involved and feel like they're creating that specific activity as well. So once you have all the papers in there, they're white, that represents the popcorn without the butter, and yellow popcorn is with the butter. Now, if you're going further into the lesson with comparing or adding or multiplying, dividing integers, you can have those yellow slips that when the students pull them out, that will determine whether it's a subtraction, division, multiplication, or addition. Now, what that would look like is, for example, if the student pulled -3 out on their first pull, and student B pulls out +3, let's say Joe Blow pulls out, I need a different color. Joe Blow pulls
This is a good one.
pulls out negative, so you're going to be subtracting. Then you're going to work through that specific problem with the students in the classroom. Also, another way that you can differentiate is actually having a sheet of paper where the students can follow along, write it down, and having specific tools depending on their learning needs beside them. So if a student's really good, maybe have no tools beside them, and if a student is below grade level, potentially the use of a calculator, which I know you're not a huge fan of, Neil, but sometimes it does help a student understand. Those would be specific ways and strategies that you can use. Oh, it's locked.
Sorry, we didn't notice the lock.
That's okay. No, secret meeting of math.
Okay, just checking. Whoa,
Yeah.
integers.
Oh, we're
And blooper number 500.
What? Did it start it?
Yeah, it started.
Oh.
Okay. Jumping into math. Okay, so basically in conclusion, there's many different ways that you can differentiate for all sorts of learners. So specifically with our 26 students and 22 of them needing differentiation. I think there's 26.
Sure.
Anyways, we had 26 students and there were 22 students that needed differentiation. I think we found a significant amount of different types of strategies. Obviously, it's overwhelming at first when you do have a class that's needing that much differentiation, but as future teachers, this is something super important and that we have to become familiar with.
I also think I learned a lot by doing this because you just, especially when you saw it in this sort of diagram, that we really did see what I could do with students like this, because everyone's going to have students like this, and I think it's really important just to understand that even those really smart students still need differentiation, and they still need just as much support from you as a student that is below grade level, and I think sometimes that's missed. So just being able to be aware that differentiation is constant throughout your class, but it's also important on this level and it's important on this level, is something I learned anyways.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also just thinking of something else, I think it's super important. I lost my train of thought. Give me a second.
I'll redo our hashtag.
Okay. Oh yeah. So it's super important. Now you made me think. Forget it again.
Blooper number 5.
Okay. It's super important. What were I thinking?
So we have hashtag last university assignment, hashtag we made it, hashtag thank you Neil.
Oh. So it's super important to have students to differentiate the students' learning, but I think it's really, this is only the beginning, of course. We could have done this video completely differently. Like, we could have actually stood up here and differentiated an entire lesson, but I think that would have been extremely time consuming. So by just having specific ideas thrown out is a much more effective way for us to understand what we were trying to express to you.
And we took, when we did this, and we'll send in this one sheet just so you understand where we were kind of coming from when we did each section. We took what it says, what should students be able to indicate after the specific mathematical concept lesson has been taught. So we took each one of our needs and we tried to figure out how they would be able to learn each one of those. So we didn't do an assignment. We took it to that approach instead, just so that you understand where we came from when we decided to do this, just to make sure that we hit everything that they technically need to learn during integers.
And we decided to verbally express it throughout a video because for us this is a differentiation strategy that we use to learn and further express our understanding of as well. And I think we were able to deliver a much more effective
I think we just gave out a lot more. We wouldn't have been able to show you exactly what we wanted to say through text, which is something I guess we need to work on.
Yeah.
But for this, we just thought we would try to see if we could do it this way, and I think you can just see more visually where we were going with our thinking than with just typing them in words.
Yeah. So thank you for watching, Neil, and we hope you have an awesome rest of your semester. And we're
Last
out of here.
semester, woo! That's our last assignment.
I know. I love it. Okay, pause. Bye.
Woo!